Everyone's out here with their little 20-watt.
Of an ambassador, because I really do believe a lot of people teach it poorly. They're ignorant. They memorize the words. They think it's a storybook, and it's all just a bunch of history and stories and miracles. And I'll figure it all out when I get to heaven, instead of an actual warrior's manual for doing combat in the here and now, 24/7. It's either a guidebook and a playbook and a law book, or it's a waste of ink on paper, right? I
Wow.
mean, and so as far as I'm concerned, things like my people are destroyed for their lack of knowledge, not engineering books, not comedy books, not math books, not physics books. It's spiritual laws. It's why are we here? What are those immutable, indestructible, timeless laws that were, are, and forever will be? And if we don't know what they are and who we are and how to use them and how they operate, then we're going to get our asses kicked on the battlefield. And life is a full-time 24/7 battle for our mind. And literally, Michael, every single thing that we do, that you do and I do and everybody listening to this, is we have the most powerful two words in the world are I will. Free will choice. You and I can consent or not consent. You and I can contract or not contract, period. If I make a decision because I'm stupid, if I make a decision because somebody, smooth talks me, if I consent to use a Federal Reserve note and have no idea about all the entanglements that come along with that contract, what do they say? Ignorance of the law is no excuse. So I use the Federal Reserve note thinking it's $1, and here comes the IRS and the agents knocking on my door and the liens on my property and my income taxes and me running faster on the treadmill and the ice cube called money melting in my hand because the purchasing power goes down to 1% of what it used to be, and so I don't know why I'm stressed out and running on the treadmill, and wokeism has broken up all over the place, and we've got Kenyans in the White House threatening to kill the president. I don't know any of that kind of stuff, but well, we have to know. We are spiritual beings. With or without knowledge of that doesn't change the fact. And spiritual beings have spiritual laws, and if you don't know those spiritual laws, you get your ass kicked. And
Very good.
So the monetary system, think about this, if the root of all evil is a love of money, wouldn't you think that the evil bastards would want to try to own the monetary system? So then they recognize it?
Yeah, they do.
So I had a wonderful conversation. One of the highlights of my life and career was to spend a day with G. Edward Griffin
Wow.
in his home out in California. To put things in perspective, Michael, he moved into his house in California in 1962, the year I was born, and he's still there. And I'm 63. And his wife of 71 years was there. And so all of his research, all of his writing, all of his endeavors, that's been his base headquarters, for 63 years. And to spend a day with that man was really, I can't even put it into words. He's a brilliant man. But
the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island. Have you ever been to Jekyll Island?
I have. Yes, sir.
Very, very interesting place, right? That's saying it nicely.
Interesting is the open qualifying word you can use.
Yes, very good. So wow, what a I saw a little piece of the interview you did with them. That's very well. And I saw that. I'm like, good God, Rob, you talked to the man. So you're really on top of all this information, and you have done a lot of great research. What did you get from talking with them?
Well, what everyone should understand is that the Federal Reserve is a cartel.
Yeah.
And what they endeavored to create when they met in secrecy in 1910, 3 years before the Federal Reserve Act was actually signed into law, was a cartel creating an agreement to manage and regulate itself with ownership outside the United States of America in the city of London. And it got the legitimacy of law when they got Woodrow Wilson to sign it. And so you got a bunch of knuckleheads in the swamp that were either ignorant, naive, tired. It was signed into law on December the 23rd of 1913. So a lot of folks on their horseback carriages had already started the long journey back home, wherever home happened to be, when this thing got signed into law. But it's an unconstitutional NGO headquartered in the 1 mile territory known as the City of London, where all the bankers were, that superimposed itself over our treasury. And we had to then lease our monetary system from foreign operatives, and all the strings and conditions like IRS and income taxes and usury interest and fractional reserve lending came along with that signature on that fateful day of December 23rd. And so we wonder why we're in debt slavery and why we owe 37 or 150 trillion or however much we owe to the Rothschilds and to an NGO. We all know that what the money went to the CIA, that went to USAID, that went to 55,000 NGOs, right? We're all appalled by that. We're like, what the hell? No wonder there's a hidden hand. No wonder we can't make any progress, because they're funneling this money in secrecy, without auditability, without clarity, without consent, without a law being passed by our supposed representative Congress. They're bleeding money into wherever George Soros wants the money to bleed. And then we're having George Floyd riots and Antifa riots and, wokeism blowing up all over the place. And we wonder, well, why bother getting in politics? We all know politics is broken. There's not a damn thing we can do about it. So let's just all bitch and moan about it. Well, why did we cut off the feed source that caused all of this enslavement, corruption, and invisible hidden hands that are kind of driven by the forces that want to divide, deceive, devour, and destroy us?
Wow, Rob, you're just like a computer when it comes to this stuff. I love it. I love your take, man. You're just like knocking it all out, and you're just like routed up. Like the views are exploding because you're basically drawing them in. So good job. So so we're at that point where a lot of us, obviously you on a great level, understand this, and I'm sure we go down all kind of different rabbit holes on all this. Titanic sinking, all that, or Olympia, whatever we want to say, all these different rabbit holes. But let's stay here for right now on what's coming down the line. Now, I kind of look at the Genius Act like what Trump did with Operation Warp Speed. It's kind of like a very silent torpedo that they don't know is coming. What are your thoughts?
Well, let's start 3 weeks into office. Okay. First of all, let's start. We know for a fact we've never seen in our life, when Trump came down the escalator in New York in 2015 to announce his presidency, from that day forward, the entire beast system unleashed everything it pretty much had at Trump and MAGA supporters: mocking, derision, cackling. We've all seen those long lines of "he'll never be president," "what an idiot," "what a loser," 3-time married, orange man, you name it. Okay. Why? I believe he was anointed to take the head off the beast, and the beast is the monetary system. Okay. Yeah. He could have cured cancer, diabetes, lymphoma, blindness, and deafness on a Saturday, and they still hated him on Sunday, and not put Melania on a single cover of a magazine, and ignored him from the television programs because they were ordered to hate the man because he was threatening the global monopoly that's fueled by money.
Yeah.
Okay. He knew how the system works, and he knew what it needed to do to rescue humanity from this enslavement system. So he gets elected on January the 20th, and 13 days later, on February the 3rd, he signs Executive Order 13772. And in that, it's 7 core principles. It's like barely a sheet of paper. 7 core principles for modernizing the new monetary system. That's it. He wants a report. Then it has to cannot violate, has to honor, and have integrous in the report all 7 of these principles. Okay. 18 months later, in July of 2018, a 222-page report published by the Treasury with 225 different contributors in that report: agencies, institutions, investment bankers, lawyers, constitutionalists, experts in cryptography, AI, quantum computing, money, sound money, debt markets, credit markets, derivatives, options, grains, futures, you name it. People from every aspect of the world, 225 different agencies were involved in this report, signed by Steve Mnuchin. Okay. And this last week, the Genius Act signed all of the components of those 7 bullet points and the derivative report that came from it into law. So you can say that, oh, wow, he just pulled 7 things just out of thin air on a weekend, at the golf course, and didn't really have any idea, put 7 things down, and whoa, Shazam. 8.5 years later, he signs into law something that is going to be the silver bullet that obliterates central banking, that makes fractional reserve lending impossible, which means you can't print money out of thin air, which means you can't do usury interest on money you printed out of thin air. And it requires a solid tier 1 asset, like a treasury bill, a note, a T-bill, or gold, in order to issue a stable coin. Okay? Stable coin, 1-to-1 asset backing, 100% transparent in our ability to audit the collateral behind the stable coin. So much so, the New York Department of Financial Services requires a monthly audit. If Ripple Labs, the RLUSD, puts out 10 million RLUSD, there has to be at least 10 million or more treasury bills, notes, or gold, some kind of tier 1 asset that back that stable coin. Okay. So if Amazon or Apple or Google or Ford Motor Company or GMC wants to issue a stable coin, fine, knock yourself out. Same rules apply. You got to buy the treasuries, you got to have the gold, you got to have 1-to-1 collateral backing.
Wow.
Okay. So if you have 1-to-1 collateral backing on a T-bill or a digital dollar, a stable digital dollar, and so does Brazil, and so does India, and so do the Philippines, well, damn, a 20 equals a 20 equals a 20, doesn't it? How do you do currency manipulation? How do you do the giant sucking sound and play around with currency exchange rates and make one thing more valuable than the other with all of this fat and margin and usury and fractional reserve lending, and export all of our manufacturing over to China for the last 30 years? Maybe you can't do that. Maybe you have to compete on a level playing field. Maybe you get rid of the fat and the middlemen in the middle. So remember how even it was so funny how Trump used to tweak the media in his first term? He'd say, I'm a stable genius. Didn't we just pass the Stable Genius Act? The Genius Act with stable coins in it?
How about that? Yeah.
You go back and look at 13 days into office, and he put his reform goals that cannot coexist with fractional reserve lending or anything that took place down at Jekyll Island.
Wow. So you see XRP and maybe gold backing as a stable coin?
Well, gold, yes. XRP is a technology. It's an enabling technology. It is a bridge utility token. Okay. It's agnostic. Think of it as a spaceship that can go Mach 9 million and go point to point, person to person, entity to entity in 3 seconds or less. It's agnostic as to the type of value that's in it or the ledger that it will record what property transferred hands from who to who. Okay. So the patented technology of XRP is that magical ledgering device retitling device, and value exchange device that allows almost anything of value to transfer between two parties for less than a penny in 3 seconds with atomic settlement. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Go to your next transaction. The fat, the middleman, what the industry calls the friction, is evaporated. Yesterday, we had the American Bankers Association on its hands and knees begging the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency to forbid Ripple and Circle from becoming banks with payments, because JP Morgan makes 100 to 200x markup every time it moves money across its closed proprietary systems, and Ripple can move the same amount of money for less than a penny.
Yeah. Interesting.
So the ability to commit fraud, the ability to take fees, the ability to spend 6 or 7 days, the ability to, instead of someone that's a gig worker in India, having to wait every 2 weeks, they can get paid by the minute while they're computer programming. Or if a worker here in the States wants to send, $100 or $1,000 to grandma in Mexico, it's not $10, it can be 10 cents.
Nice.
And so where does all that value stay, Michael? Where does that value stays in the economy? And to put a bow on this, Michael, because I think this is so important for folks of us that are older, aged well, we can remember when cell phones first came out with the bag phones, right? And the antenna on the back of your car, and $1.35 a minute for prime and 95 cents for non-prime, and terrible reception, right?
Right.
What happened when the industry basically took us to a flat rate, $40 a month, unlimited talk, text, and data? What happened? When you got rid of the friction, you had an explosion in utility. The cell phone companies made more money than they've ever made in their life. One of the fastest growing industries ever, the mobile services business, mobile communications. Adoption went up, affordability went up, revenue to these mobile providers went up, and the economy grew like hell because people could talk, they could collaborate, they could share ideas, they could spend 24/7 on the phone. They, in essence, felt the utilization of mobile minutes was free. It was affordable, it was free, it was easy, people could talk more, the economy, everybody got more productive, and we had a mushroom effect of GDP growth. Apply that same model to money. Now, money can move at a hyper velocity, 24/7, 365, not banker's hours, not closed on holidays, for less than a penny. And I can send money, I can drip money to an employee working for me by the minute. People could be watching this program right now and dripping a penny a minute while they're online listening to us. And as long as we keep them engaged, you're making a penny or nickel a minute or whatever you charge, and it's draining from their wallet. If they get bored or got to go to dinner and they click off, then the money stops. But when the friction goes away, the utilization explodes. And so this kind of
excellent analogy, Rob. Wow, that's fantastic. Best I've ever heard. Good job.
Well, and lastly, here's the cover charge to get onto the digital architecture of the new monetary system. The cover charge to get onto an XRP or get onto a blockchain and move value from point A to point B, Michael, is 100% transparency and 100% accountability. What are two things we've never gotten in our lives from the Federal Reserve?
Absolutely.
No audit, no transparency. They don't want you to see the fat and the friction behind the curtain because that's where they make all their money.
Yeah.
So now these institutions formerly known as banks are going to have to compete on the value that they bring their customers, value added, not checking account fees or bounce check fees or usury interest fees or, giving you 2% for your passbook savings account and charging me 7.5% for a car loan. That kind of spread and fees and bounce check charges and interest, all this kind of stuff is, I'm going to be able to become my own banker and you're going to be able to become your own banker. And there is nowhere to hide this friction. People, it's like we're going from Blockbuster to Netflix. And if the banks don't switch over to the Netflix model, they are dead and gone like that.
Fabulous, fabulous. So, so you explain the movement of funds exceptionally. Where does a stable coin come in? Because we've seen stable coins in the past. I actually invested one, Terra Luna, which basically went away like that. Yeah. So do we have the potential of having a stable coin? I believe we do, but what is going to be the safeguards? What is going to keep that stable? I think you just alluded to it with gold and so forth, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, by definition, it should be stable. I mean, if America had $20 trillion in stable coins, digital dollars in existence, and I go and invest in, $10,000, hopefully in a year from now, I'm going to have $10,000. It's not really an investment. It's just it's a transfer of value. I mean, money is supposed to be a store of value, a unit of account. Okay. And, I always forget the third one, and G. Edward Griffin would mark my paper down to a D because I forgot the third one, but it's a store of value and a unit of account. And it should not fluctuate. It should not shrink. It should not inflate or debase. It should keep its value. So if I have a $5 and I want to give it to my kids in 10 years from now, that $5 coin, like a gold coin, right? A gold coin would buy a suit and a tie and a belt and a hat and a pair of shoes 100 years ago, like it will today, right? It should maintain a stable value. That's what a stable coin is. If you wanted to invest in a company that is creating stable coins and there's some profit and some margin to go in to help Apple or Amazon or Ford or Microsoft generate stable coins, because they've already got massive audiences, they're already flowing, they already know how to click and buy and go to app stores, and they're an obvious competitor, user, and threat to money center banks and payment organizations. Because what happens now if Microsoft doesn't need them anymore? If Amazon has to make payments in 147 countries every 2 weeks and they don't need to go to a third-party middleman with all this fat and friction? What if that cost of moving money goes from 6% to 0.6%? And they do it in-house and the CFO can control it. And they don't need Chase. They don't need Bank of America. They don't need Wells Fargo. How much money goes into the coffers of Microsoft or Apple or Amazon when they can generate their own? Not only can they generate their own stablecoin, but look at the new number of customers that become eager buyers of treasuries issued by the United States Treasury. So now there's a relationship, a constitutional relationship between the Treasury, which by our Constitution was supposed to only issue dollars that had a certain weight of silver or gold to them.
Yeah.
We've been taught our whole lives to call the Federal Reserve note a dollar, and it's not a dollar. It's an IOU. It's a debt instrument to a foreign NGO. And that's what they put a lien on. That kills the unalienable part of our Constitution. And with the lien comes the IRS and the income tax and the capital gains taxes and the estate taxes and the ad valorem taxes and every other thing that they say that we signed up for. And we go, no, I didn't. I didn't know anything about that. And they come back at us and say, well, ignorance of the law is no excuse. That you consented by your very use of our 20s and 30s and 50s and 5s and 10s. You owe us income tax. Where did I sign up for that?
Good point. I have the debt clock. This is a great thing, a tool for everyone. If you look at the Fed dollar, like you talked about, an ounce of gold will still buy you a nice suit, yes, as it did in 1913. But a dollar, if you had that same dollar in 1913, you've lost 96.23. Same dollar is not going to buy you, or the same value of gold. It's not going to buy you anything. You want to get a pair of shoes. Right. You might get maybe a decent tie, but that's it.
And that's by design. People need to understand that the shrinkage is by design, because the monetary system designed by the boys in Jekyll Island requires an ongoing printing of the supply. It has to constantly increase. And the increase in spending creates a inflation and a loss of purchasing power. So the more and more they have to print for endless wars or boondoggles or tunnels under the ground or NGOs and wokeism, whatever it is, they have to come up with a rationale to keep their Ponzi scheme operational. Requires the pump in the printing press to operate nonstop. Deflation kills their business model. They cannot, which the logical next step is all of this argument we've always heard about balancing the budget and who's going to be more frugal and who's going to spend and who's going to not. It's WWF wrestling. Neither side was ever going to pay it off because the central bankers would never let it be paid off. They're going to constantly pump and constantly increase the money supply and the debt, because without it, their system buckles and folds. So everything we've ever gotten into an argument over the dinner table about budgets and fiscal responsibility and balancing the budget has all been kabuki theater.
On your post, like I said,
you're breaking up.
Yeah, on your X site, you have some great posts. I'm going to share the screen on one of your posts. Just recently, we were talking about all wars are bankers' wars, and I mean, think about it. When we had the COVID lockdown, there were no wars, there were no conflicts because they were in complete control at that point. So why don't we still have no wars? And that's because they have to make the money again. So as you're saying here, all wars are bankers' wars, with the primary cause of wars being the love of money, power, and ultimately control over others. Global money payment systems have long been clunky, slow, outdated, hard, and expensive, primarily due to centralization of control mandates by banksters. So you got some great posts in there. Explain the war thing, how they make money on the wars. That's one of the biggest ones. I've seen it myself. Working as a, not only as a Navy SEAL, but also for CIA. I began to see that, especially the first war I was in, and that was the operation that basically go into Panama. And I was disillusioned. I was like, here I am going to go to war. I'm going to serve my country and do the right thing. And then I started to see these wars are manipulated. And then I started to see the same thing in the CIA all over the world, Middle East. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, Michael, the operating law here is divide and conquer, right? If you want to maintain control, I mean, you got a small handful of people trying to control 5, 6, 7, 8 billion people. You got to keep them divided, feed them bread and circuses, keep them killing each other, keep everybody arguing this way instead of looking this way, right? So let's follow the money when all wars are bankers' wars. You have the military-industrial complex, and it keeps everybody pumping out the armament. It requires a constant narrative of fear. There's always a boogeyman out there, whether it's Iran or Iraq or Russia or North Korea. There's always a crazy madman out there. We grew up hiding underneath our desk at school, right? Because the Russians could come any minute, So the single greatest enriching activity bankers can possibly endeavor to engage in is war, because they get to generate billions, if not trillions of dollars to all parties involved, however many parties, 2 nations, 12 nations, 20 nations. Everybody's the money printer has to go burr. You got to pay the troops, you got to pay the armament, you got to pay the fuel, you got to pay all the things that you got to do. And who gets stuck with all that printed money? The citizens of every nation that's at war.
Taxpayers.
And we get to pay taxes and interest on those trillions of dollars in 20 nations over the war. But, we had to go get those Ruskies because they're bad. With the Saudis, took over our airplanes, so we had to go to Afghanistan for 20 years. What? but when you follow how much money, and not the lies, just forget about the lies and human treasure. How many nations and how much money did we go into debt? And then how much taxes had to be put on when this system came in place, the gold bars got kicked out to the side of the door and we became the gold bars. The lien to pay back these debts was me and you and our kids and grandkids. That's where the lien, we were the collateral, and that allowed them to control us and print money out of their rear ends and charge us interest and tax us to death. And by the time we can even think about breathing, here comes the next war. Here comes and it can be a pandemic war. It can be an open borders invasion war. It can be a wokeism war. It can be a biological war with chemicals to the tip of a needle into our arms. It could be a George Floyd war. It could be a Antifa war. It could be a George Soros war because he's just undermining the nuclear family and ripping us all apart. Mom's got to go to work, dad's got to go to work, and the government gets to train our kids, and we get to spend a couple hours a day together. But for the most part, even the nuclear family gets obliterated because everybody's got to run on the treadmill in order to pay the tax man who's controlled by the banksters, and so this entire parable in the law book, the love of money is the root of all evil. They called it filthy lucre. And if you can control the money, which is really just a manifest form of human energy, if money is human energy and they control all the money, then they're controlling all the human energy.
Yeah. Well, what do you see as being that stable coin? Is it developed yet, or is there a stable coin?
Yeah. For sure. That Ripple Labs and Circle are both two big proponents of stable coins. I mean, they create them. Circle is backed by Goldman Sachs, and Ripple Labs, RLUSD. It was authorized in December of 2024. It's regulated underneath the auspices of the Treasury. If you'll remember, in March of 2020, the Treasury took the Federal Reserve up underneath its wing because of the emergency orders and the biological attack, and President Trump declared a state of emergency and emergency order, and President Autopin never canceled it. So in essence, even the New York Times wrote an article in mid-2020 saying, meet your new Federal Reserve Chairman, President Donald Trump. Because the Treasury Secretary is part of the executive branch, which reports to the President of the United States. And if the Federal Reserve is underneath the Treasury, he had ultimate power for the first time ever. Okay? So now that he created, one of the first executive orders in his second term when he was sworn in, he created the Bitcoin Strategic Fund and then the crypto fund with four tokens in it, XRP being one of them. Okay, XRP, Ethereum, Cardano, and one other. I forgot what the fourth one was. But so the New York Department of Financial Services has got about 60 to 80 people in it. It's probably the single most rigorous, difficult, stern-nosed compliance entity on earth. These people in the New York Department of Financial Services are the ones that teach the SEC and the CFTC and the House and the Senate and all the chairmen of the Financial Services Committee. Everybody has to basically learn and be regulated under the New York Department of Financial Services. It stands to reason America is the largest economy in the world. And where's the headquarters for our economy? New York. Right, where all the bankers are, where all the banksters are. So the New York Department of Financial Services is the most rigorous, onerous, and compliant, stringent entity probably on earth. Okay. Wow. So they gave, through Ripple, acquired a company called Standard Custody, and Standard Custody applied for a stablecoin license underneath the New York Department of Financial Services, and it was approved. They checked all the boxes, all the requirements for compliance and transparency and solvency, and the whole 9 yards. So what does that mean? What that means is if Ripple Labs wants to produce a stable coin, they want to produce 10 million stable coins, they have to go buy $10 million worth of treasuries or T-bills or a tier one asset. And every month, every 30 days, they have to file a fully audited report with the New York Department of Financial Services proving they have one-to-one collateral. So if it's 500 million or 50 billion or $5 trillion in stable coins, every single month they have to prove the gold's in the safe, the treasuries are in the custody account, the collateral is there, it's sound money, it's not a checks in the mail or trust me, bro. The assets back the stable coin. And all of this, Ripple Labs and its custody, standard custody that produces these stable coins, and the New York Department of Financial Services that inspects it on a monthly basis, all operates under the supervision of the Treasury Secretary. So in essence, the full faith and credit of the federal government is in play here, right? But Ripple can't just go, you know what, I'm gonna issue 100 million, but I only got 64 million in Treasury bills, so I'll pay it back later. They'd shut them down in a New York minute, and they'd be out of business and lose their license. So when you have that level of rigor and requirements for stability on a stable coin, and again, there's other parts of the stable coin besides just collateral. Remember when Elon Musk and Doge was doing its thing and running its algorithms and finding all of this hidden money and what wasn't being reported, and Musk talked about, we really ought to get our act together and just move this whole treasury on the blockchain. Well, you don't have NGOs and 55,000 entities that are hiding money in the Hillary set of books and the State Department set of books and the CIA set of books and the U.S. government set of books and the Federal Reserve set of books. It doesn't work that way. A ledger is an accounting system. So the blockchain is an open, public, transparent, accountable ledgering system. And if I can see it and China can see it and India can see it, then Turkey and Iran don't have to trust each other. They can hate each other's guts. But if somebody's got gold and money and somebody's got oil and they need to make a trade, that trade's not based on trust anymore, or the checks in the mail, or I'll gladly pay you on Tuesday for some spinach today. I mean, it's atomic settlement, it's transfer of value, the money is there, and it's instantaneous in the transaction. So the whole level playing field that President Trump has talked about, Michael, when you have a level playing field and trust and transparency and no central bankers that can hoard the kind of wealth they've hoarded since 1913, you no longer have a funding source for world wars. The ability to engage in world wars and get all the actors together, the band together, and the Klaus Schwab to declare a war, or the United Nations or NATO or some other group say, you know what, we're going to call our buddies over at the BIS and the Federal Reserve, and you're either going to go to war with us or we're going to sanction your ass. Well, when you don't have a top-down central sanctioning entity that issues all the money, these stable coins come from the bottom up. They come from Ford or Amazon or the U.S. Treasury or Argentina. Anybody that's got a tier one asset called gold can come into compliance with stablecoin issuance. But these stable coins come from the bottom up, not from the Federal Reserve down. And they're not privately owned. They're backed by sovereign tier one assets, the U.S. Treasury asset, which is, until gold became classified as a tier one asset under Basel accounting standards, the U.S. dollar was the only tier one asset in the world. Mm-hmm. Now it's gold. And now you can go back and understand why there's been a whoring of gold all over the world, and people have wanted to get gold in their treasuries. So then they can issue their own, the dinar can be backed, the ruby can be backed, the peso can be backed. All of these currencies can be backed by a tier one asset, and they can issue their own damn stable coin. If they want to use the US dollar, great. And if they don't want to, they don't have to.
Beautiful. So do you think that Trump Trump is going to bring in the gold with the dollar and peg it?
I do believe we're going to go to a golden standard, golden principles, golden transparency, golden accountability, golden. And here's the thing, Michael, with satellites and Space Force and Fort Knox and the Vatican City and gazillions of miles of hidden tunnels where they've stolen all of our wealth and parked it in all places over Hell's Half Acre. If our military and or friendlies know where our gold is, it should be ours, and we can 24/7, 365 understand that our gold is in the Philippines or in Fort Knox or at Fort Rucker, Alabama, and we can keep it and we know where it is and it's there and it's secured and it can collateralize whatever issuance of dollar, these trust instruments that we issue, then the quantum computers and the U.S. Space Force and the satellites and the accounting ledgers and the cryptography can all work together, and we can make certain beyond any shadow of a doubt that we have sound collateralized stable coins backed by tier 1 assets. The location of the asset is not nearly as important as the actuality of the asset.
So it sounds like the Treasury is basically in charge now, and the Federal Reserve is basically being squeezed. Now, today we had, there was a rumor and a leak or something that Powell was resigning, but they came out and said, no, that's fake. But I think we're going to continue to see these little pushes, like Trump wants him out of there because he's basically stealing, the Fed's stealing our money by keeping interest rates high massively. And Trump is trying to expose that. When do you see the Fed and, of course, their collection arm, the IRS, going away? If at all?
Well, I believe, Michael, this is more about optics and capacity for markets and people to comprehend the radical change in things that they've always taken for granted, like coffee and sunrise and sunset, right? I mean, there's the markets, President Trump and his team that are behind him have to do certain things so that you don't have anarchy and you don't have chaos and you don't have people losing their minds. So there's you can't eat 9,000 calories at a meal or 94,000 calories. You have to kind of pace yourself. And so markets and people and institutions, what's going to happen to all the bean counters when the IRS goes away? Where are they going to go work? Where are the CPAs going to go work? When you don't need these folks, working on Excel spreadsheets and however many people that is and the wealth that their jobs are going to be gone. Okay. So when the IRS goes bye-bye and those employees go bye-bye and, we have micro shavings of transactions. And if the ledgers know that you're Michael and all of your income under $150,000 is free and how much has come in, and then you start getting in the higher realms and you swipe a card or your wallet, MasterCard that's attached to your digital wallet, and you're buying coffee or cars or whatever, and it swipes a little bit out to pay for your, local state taxes and federal taxes. It happens on a flow basis, and you don't have to fill out some big long form and report yourself. And if you get the numbers wrong, go to prison. I mean, there's so many other ways to deal with our tax obligations than at the point of an AK-47 and some asshole from the IRS, right? There's a lot of different ways to, and the thing is, when you cut this Leviathan government down by 70 or 80 or 90%, and you turn these idiot buildings in the District of Columbia into museum relics, and you push everything out into the mainland, and the Treasury goes to Texas and the Bureau of Land Management goes to Colorado. And I mean, all of this stuff gets spread. If we're going to decentralize money, why wouldn't we decentralize a centralized government?
Absolutely.
Why wouldn't we make our congressmen and senators stay here and eat their own damn dog food instead of voting for shit up in Washington, D.C. and hiding from us for the next 3 months? I mean, make them come out and check their own mail after they make some stupid vote.
Yeah.
I mean, that only makes sense to me.
saw that with the euro. I remember I was like, okay, we're in the information age. Everything's being decentralized. And then the European Union and the euro, I was like, this is centralization. What's going on here? Mm-hmm. And it's supposed to be spinning the opposite direction. So I think these are the last holdouts. And like you said, remember when we had rotary phones? Yep. You know how long it took to dial?
You made a mistake and your finger slipped out of the circle.
So imagine all those people that are still in that business, if it even exists. I'm sure it probably doesn't, but they're still holding on, hope that it's going to come back. It's kind of like the Federal Reserve. The people in the Federal Reserve right now, they're holding out hope that they're still going to have a job in the next few years, but it's just going to get isolated. It's going to get it's irrelevant. It'll be irrelevant, I think, with this new system coming in. So and then you don't have to go to war with them because they're just irrelevant. It's like, you want to go to war, you don't even have any money. You don't, right. Go away, get out of here.
100%. And so when you start to think about the fear that people can then, because fear, in the What's the Law book say 365 times, fear not, be not afraid. But when you fear, you go from 5D to 3D and you stop thinking critically and you take a knee and you kiss the ring and you ask somebody to make the fear go away and you look for a savior and you don't know what's going on here. And oh my God, somebody protect me, and so, I put a chart up on my X post the other day that said there's about, I don't know, it's 27 or 37 trillion dollars in payments that are going to be moving to stablecoin between now and 2030. And if you begin to start looking at, well, what if you reduce the friction of moving $37 trillion by 2% or 3% or 4% or 5%? The 5% number was, there's a $1.2 trillion per year savings by using stable coins instead of ACH, MasterCard, Visa, Swift, or, direct deposit, and all of these private, JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon owned proprietary pipes that have all of these godless fees and friction and idiocy in it. So over 10 years, we could easily save $12 to $20 trillion just in payments. That's $20 trillion that stays with us as people, or some with the banks and some with us, or some with companies. But now institutions are going to have to compete. And if somebody's charging more, then Mercedes is going to change its bank, or Ford's going to change its bank, or Publix is going to change their bank. So now everyone's going to have to compete on services and value, not currency exchange manipulation. Because everyone's going to know that the cost is less than a penny to move this money around. Why the hell are you charging me what you're charging me? That won't last long. What's happening, Michael, is because of DLT technology and the almost free ability to move money around the world, every person, every entity, every corporation, every government agency is going to have to ask themselves one question: can I do this operation for more money or less money? And when they can answer the question less money, then they're going to choose the provider that lets them do, all things considered, the process for less money.
Better, faster, smoother for less. Duh.
At the end of the day,
Federal Reserve and get all this extra money that they want from you, or like you're saying, pennies on the dollar, what they charge. Yeah, definitely.
That is going to usher in an era of abundance, low friction, not to mention all of the unlocked treasures that's been stolen from us. I mean, you can read all about what happens throughout the ages. It's happened hundreds of times that the wicked steal and rape and pillage, and they store up the riches, only to what? Ultimately be returned to the righteous, right? How much wealth have they stolen from us in the last 112 years? Through inflation, debasement, taxation, regulation, capital gains taxes, estate taxes, gift taxes, excise, you name it. how much wealth of the American people have been extracted from this wealth extraction system. And then why is Jerome Powell building a $2.5 billion mausoleum to himself in the Federal Reserve? That's more money than the Taj Mahal took to build. I mean, that's one of the reasons that they're referring him on criminal charges, because he perjured himself before the Congress and lied about the budget overruns and how much of our, quote, taxpayer dollars was being spent to build his Taj Mahal. And so, he's getting charged with criminal charges for perjury, felony perjury in front of the Congress. So one way or the other, I think, Trump's going to get rid of Powell because the Federal Reserve is going bye-bye. The Federal Reserve is not necessary. And here's the point that your audience ought to understand, Michael. If you don't have a central bank, you can't have a central bank digital currency.
Beautiful. Because a lot of people have that concern, and I think we've outlined.
You have a U.S. Treasury digital dollar, right. But that ain't a central bank.
Yep.
That's a country. That's the country issuing the digital dollar. That's not the Federal Reserve or the Bank of International Settlements or the Bank of England or the Bank of Canada. It's not a private for-profit central bank issuing a digital currency. It's our own government issuing a digital dollar backed by our treasuries or gold. That's a horse of a different color.
Fantastic. Fantastic, Rob. Wow, it's been a great discussion. First of many, I hope. And how can people reach you? I know you got an excellent X site. And how else can they reach you?
Yeah, cool.show. KUWL.show is my website. Or if you do the Linktree thing, the link.tr.ee/cool show, that has all of my properties. Or just Google my name on X or YouTube, and I'm sure you'll find Rob Cunningham.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, we'll have this in the description, and also I think we put it in the chat a couple of times. But yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Rob. It's been a pleasure and honor. I think this is one of the best explanations I've ever heard. It soothed me because I was kind of like, what? And so I started looking at your work, and I was like, got to have this guy on to explain this. So Rob, yeah, it's great. We look forward to having you on in the future. Everybody's loving it. So great views. One of the top views that I've had on the show. So this is something that people want to know, and we'll keep coming back and giving it to them. How about that?
Thank you, Michael, brother. I'm honored, man. Thank you for your service again, and say hi to Tracy. Say hi to Tracy Joe for me.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.